We didn't anticipate we'd ever make a video like this, but this was too good an opportunity to pass up. Extra Credits is a channel that has attracted over 2 million subscribers over 7 years of uploading generally insightful videos about history and video games. Their video on normalization is different.
There you are, playing the PvP in your World War II shooter, and all of a sudden, you're a Nazi.
Who knew World War II games doubled as a time machine? There you are, playing PvP in your World War II shooter, and all of a sudden you're transported back to the 1930s in Germany and enlisted in the ruling party.
You didn't ask for this.
I never asked for this.
You didn't choose this.
Choose what? To be placed on the German team? You do accept that possibility when you queue for multiplayer.
You didn't choose this. Yet there it is.
Are you seriously using Battlefield 5 as an example? The game that went out of its way to sanitize its setting with no regard for historical accuracy? Look at that flag. What the hell is that? No, that's not an Iron Cross. This is an Iron Cross. And the channel's been deleted because we just showed an Iron Cross. I don't know what the hell that is supposed to be. Are you seriously citing as an example the game that inserted modern concepts of gender inclusion into a historical setting and sparked a controversy over the resulting anachronisms? This is amazing. I never thought Battlefield 5 would be criticised for being too politically incorrect. But here we are.
And it's treated no differently than playing a British soldier.
Who's treating it no differently? The players? Maybe it's because there was no difference in gameplay.
This is bad on so many levels. No one should ever have a random chance of fighting for the Nazis.
1. Playing a computer game is not fighting for National Socialists. 2. Most games allow you to switch teams if you don't want to play on the German team. And 3. If you're so uneasy about Nazis, what the hell are you doing playing a World War II game? There are literally thousands, if not millions, of other games you could be playing instead. But no, you choose a game with Nazis in it and then complain when you're playing as them. I don't like McDonald's, but I'm going to eat a Big Mac. Fuck you, McDonald's, for making me eat a Big Mac.
And we should never express that there's no meaningful difference between Nazis and Allied soldiers, or that they're functionally interchangeable.
Games have a concept called balance. If the two sides are not functionally interchangeable, one team may have a gameplay advantage over the other, leading to players on the weaker team resenting the fact they're fighting an uphill battle that makes skill matter less than choosing the functionally stronger side.
And before anyone equivocates and says not all German soldiers in World War II were Nazis, if they were wearing the swastika.
Are you still referring to Battlefield 5 as your example? Have you even played the game? I can't think of any multiplayer title that lets players wear the swastika.
And are functioning as an arm of the Nazi government.
What does this even mean in a video game? Rounding up political opponents? Killing them in the Night of the Long Knives? I can't think of any video game that comes close.
Then unless the game goes out of its way to tell you specifically that your particular character is not a Nazi,
are you still talking about multiplayer games? How would any PvP shooter do this in the middle of a match? Oh, you want to respawn? Well, first you need to watch this 5-minute cutscene about the backstory of your character and how he was conscripted into the army. By the time you're done watching, the match might have already concluded. Unless everyone else is also watching the cutscene, waiting to respawn. And then they can insert ads during the cutscene.
then they're a Nazi.
No, they're just pixels on a screen.
In that multiplayer shooter, when it switched you to the German side, did it go out of its way to tell you that the person you're playing was pressed into service under threat of their life? Yeah, that's a big old nope.
Because that would break the entire game. Because that would render matches unplayable.
Oh, and on a similar note, let's please stop forcing people to play as terrorists as well.
Are people seriously this sensitive in 2019? We're all so precious, aren't we? If you don't like it, don't play it. Can't believe I'm quoting Patrick Sutherland.
There you are, playing your modern shooter, and all of a sudden you're a terrorist.
So playing a computer game makes you a terrorist now. What's wrong with you? So if I play as a Japanese hero in For Honor, does that make me a literal samurai?
You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose this.
You kinda did when you queued for multiplayer.
And yet, second verse, same as the first. There it is. I mean, that's literally the name of your side in the game.
Perhaps shooter games are not for you. They're all about killing with guns and grenades. And sometimes shovels.
We can do better than this. Even if you put aside all of the people who have had traumatic experiences with these groups, who have lost loved ones to terrorists, or who have had generations of their families wiped out by Nazis.
One would think the generation that witnessed actual Nazis firsthand will be too old to play video games. Those who don't play video games are not affected by what's in them.
No one should have to put on the costume of an ideology they find abhorrent.
You can always switch teams, or not play the game at all. It's clear these guys have no clue what they're talking about. Most multiplayer titles do not feature any symbols that might be controversial, or worse, get them in trouble with German authorities, though that might not be as big a concern anymore. Still, most PvP games discard historical insignia for generic inoffensive imagery. Just look at your own example, Battlefield 5. No, actually look at it for more than a second. Don't just search for World War II games and grab the first screenshot you find. Play the game for a few minutes and you'll realise how mistaken you are. Or don't. It's not a very good game.
No one should have to put on the costume of an ideology they find abhorrent without actually opting into it in your game.
You do opt into seeing Germans when you play a World War II shooter. What did you expect to see? Brazilians fighting Argentinians?
And by making people do so, we get them to stop thinking about it, to stop thinking of the meaning behind these things. We normalize them. We make them just window dressing for entertainment.
Like movies have been doing for over 60 years now? And yet you haven't said a word about them.
Those uniforms, those symbols, become things that no longer inherently revolt us.
The Iron Cross, the current symbol of the German federal defense that the Bundeswehr. Why aren't you taking this up with the German government?
They reduce our visceral reaction to seeing the embodiment of these ideologies. But for some people, it moves them from the territory of revolting to just edgy. It means you might not take iron crosses all over a website as a warning sign that you should immediately leave.
Websites like the official portal of the Bundeswehr, the German Armed Forces.
Friends, by the 1000th time you've respawned as a terrorist, you're either celebrating them.
Playing Counter-Strike is celebrating terrorists now.
By the 1000th time you've respawned as a terrorist, you're either celebrating them or making fun of them.
Making fun of terrorists is bad now.
Neither of which helps the global crisis we have that takes thousands of lives every year.
Is that what you think you're doing? Helping a global crisis?
So what do? That's easy. Don't make them morally equivalent.
They are not morally equivalent. They're balanced in their firepower for gameplay reasons.
Don't make there be no in-game moral difference between your Nazis and your allies.
Multiplayer games are not about morality. They're about skill.
Between your terrorists and your counter-terrorist squads.
But there already is. Terrorists hold hostages. Counter-terrorists try to extract them. Terrorists plant bombs. Counter-terrorists defuse them. The difference is clear-cut. They even use different guns, for God's sake.
Frame PvP as a training exercise.
This is literally the worst idea ever. Just look at their concept. Toying with Nerf guns. They literally want games diluted and dumbed down to something that would only appeal to toddlers.
Or simply take one of your non-odious sides and recolor them so that it's red versus blue, rather than Axis versus Allies.
Remove historical references and context from a historical game. Brilliant.
A good example of a game that does this is Rainbow Six Siege. All of your bomb diffusion and hostage rescue multiplayer with no normalizing terrorists. In fact, by having all of the characters as counter-terrorists training for a possible threat, it highlights how real and present of a threat that is.
I'm fairly certain you die in Rainbow Six Siege if you're shot in the head. Doesn't sound much like a training exercise.
And if you decide that you need to have both sides be playable, don't make them interchangeable.
The entire world can separate fantasy from reality, video games from reality, shooting guns in video games to shooting guns in real life. The entire world can separate it. Have no problem, except for these idiots. And what's even more crazy is these people think they're more intelligent than the rest of us. And we're sitting here looking at them going, you're a bunch of idiots.
Don't have players randomly spawn in as one or the other.
Games only do this to ensure both teams have an equal number of players.
Allow players to choose which side they're on.
Not a bad idea.
Now, of course, this has all sorts of in-game problems, such as creating shorter wait times for fascists.
Are you saying most players wouldn't pick the German side? Or more importantly, are you implying that any player that does join the German team, which you predict will have fewer players, is a fascist?
But you know what? Those wait times could be artificially extended.
What? Why? This would inconvenience all players, not just the ones who join the German team. For one, Allied players won't have as many targets to shoot at. It's hilarious how out of touch this video is. Consumers and developers alike try to minimize loading times. Developers optimize their games to reduce the data that must be loaded while players purchase faster storage drives to load the optimized data quicker. Meanwhile, this video advocates artificially extending wait times. Brilliant!
If it meant players had an active choice in what teams they would represent,
Like they do now.
if you're saying we need people playing Nazis in our games.
You kind of do if you set your game in the Second World War. I suppose developers could choose the Pacific Theatre for their World War II setting, but I'll wager you'd have a problem with players joining the Imperial Japanese team as well.
And if you're going to say, but we need it for historical reasons, then your game better actually be historical.
Oh, yes! For the first time, you're speaking sense. Historical games should try to be historically accurate. That's what we wanted from the start. Historical accuracy, not social pandering.
You can't really just hide behind the fact you called your desert map El Alamein and say, but it's historical. If that were the case, you need your PvP to at least represent real historical events
Not a bad idea.
and be a realistic take on those battles. Once you make both sides balanced, it's also no longer historical.
If you don't balance a game, it would be a broken product.
And you can't really say that you need Nazis anymore for historical accuracy.
One has nothing to do with the other, though. Developers can make the setting as visually authentic as possible while still balancing the gameplay to prevent the frustrating experience.
Oh, and once you let players get cool weapons that weren't actually at that particular battleground, it's also no longer historically accurate.
While there is a point here, it isn't nearly as black and white as the video makes it out to be. Giving players the option to use an STG-44 in an early World War II battle is not nearly as disconnecting as players running around with M4 assault rifles and M60 machine guns.
And you can't declare that your game will suffer if you don't put players in the jackboots of the Third Reich.
Including the most significant theatre of war in a World War II game is not putting players in the jackboots of the Third Reich. Letting players join the German team in a World War II game is not putting them in the jackboots of the Third Reich. What's wrong with you? If I put on some basketball shoes, it doesn't make me Michael Jordan.
And once your map is something carefully designed to have good gameplay by a team in a room in San Francisco or LA, and it's not a faithful reconstruction of the actual places the historical events occurred in, you can no longer say we need to have players take up arms in service of terror or hate.
You mean take up a keyboard and mouse to move pixels on a screen?
And look, we're not saying we can't have games about World War II or about terrorism.
That's what you're heavily implying, though.
We're not even saying we shouldn't make games where you play as a Nazi or a terrorist.
That's literally what you've been saying for the last 4 minutes.
But what we are saying is that the fact that you're playing as a Nazi or a terrorist in a game has to mean something. And it can't just be a skin. It can't be something that a game randomly drops you into.
For the millionth time, it is not random. The game will drop you in the German team if it is at a numerical disadvantage. And most games let you swap teams after both sides are balanced.
Games can do better. And in this particular case, it's not even that hard to do better.
So why don't you act on your ideas and develop your dream game? It'd be interesting to see how profitable your ideas really are. Not very, I wager. We'll have 32 Allied players in one team and no one on the other team. Awesome.
It's no more costly to do better.
Perhaps not in development costs, but certainly in revenue and audience retention.
All it requires is that we in the game industry be cognizant of the world around us.
How wise. How enlightened. How pretentious can you get? This sanctimony is nauseating to listen to. It's inconceivable how anyone could spout this much rubbish with a straight face.
And what these symbols we're drawing on mean.
History.
That we think as we're building.
Developers might find this video pretty insulting for implying they don't think when they build their games.
If we can do that, we can take a big step forward for the industry.
How would you know?
We can stop helping to normalize Nazis.
It's interesting you don't say a word about the thousands of World War II films, a list that includes movies like Downfall that depict the Nazi perspective. But I understand, yours is a gaming channel. No time for historical cinematic culture. Ironically, commenters pointed out Extra Credits was previously sponsored by World of Tanks, a game that includes historical German references. The irony doesn't end there, as extra credits call for self-censorship standards in a stark contrast to a video they published in 2012, wherein they defended developers who dared explore dark topics in their games.
We've had them all. Video games cause violent behavior, video games encourage crime, video games cause addiction, video games socially cripple children, video games cause obesity, this game's a porn simulator, that game's a murder simulator, games cause this or that school shooting. Good times.
Even more ironically,
Now, controversy is bound to keep flaring up as games grow, and there's nothing we can really do to prevent that. What I'm going to talk about is what we can do. What is it about games that disqualifies them from exploring this harsh territory? We can't keep marginalizing ourselves by pretending we only craft products for children. We are not toy makers.
funnily enough, this is what their most recent call to stop normalization wants games to be reduced to: toys. This wasn't due to a change of writers. Both of these opposing viewpoints were written by the same person, James Portnow. What the hell happened? Did he forget what he had published 7 years ago?
We will have to be steadfast under the scrutiny of the world, and resolute when we are asked to justify ourselves in the court of public opinion.
His views had changed. Why didn't he talk about what triggered that change in the normalization video? Instead, he ignores his former support for what he now condemns. That might be an understatement looking at the channel as a team. Just read what their community manager said on Twitter. "We fully expect this to happen every time we've uploaded a Games Are Political video." Why? Are all your political videos so stupid? I haven't watched most of them, so I wouldn't know. Your tweet makes me think that doing so might be a waste of time. "We love losing all the bigoted subscribers." Really? You love a drop in viewership? An entirely unnecessary, pointless and deliberate drop in traffic, I might add. Less bigotry is great. Dislikes are still engagement. All this manufactured controversy is still getting clicks, still getting them advertising, and still getting them paid. It's funny that their first reaction to their sanctimony backfiring is to double down and dig themselves into a deeper hole. That's their prerogative, though it is rather sad to see a legacy of educational videos be tarnished by this garbage. And that concludes our take on extra credits. There is more content like this in the way, so please like, subscribe, and press the bell button so you don't miss out. Several subscribers have reported that YouTube are screwing with their notifications, even when the bell button is enabled. So if that's true, just keep an eye out for our thumbnails. New videos will also be announced on Twitter, so please follow us over there too. Link is in the comments and the description below. We have a secondary channel we're using as a backup, just in case. So head over to there and like and subscribe that one too. While you're here, feel free to watch our analysis on Denuvo's history and performance impact, our analysis of Battlefield 5's controversies, and our hardware analysis of CPUs and graphics cards.